You know how they say, what happens in the woods stays in the woods? Well, let me tell you, sometimes what happens in the woods follows you home and haunts your every waking moment. That's what happened to me and my friends on what was supposed to be a fun little camping trip last summer. There were 5 of us: me, Jake, Sarah, Mike, and Liz. We'd been planning this getaway for months, eager to escape the city and lose ourselves in nature for a weekend. The spot we chose was perfect. A secluded clearing near a crystal-clear lake, miles from the nearest hint of civilization. Or so we thought. The first day was everything we'd hoped for. We set up camp, went for a swim, roasted marshmallows under the stars. It was idyllic, you know? That perfect Instagram-worthy outdoor experience. But then came the second night. We were sitting around the campfire, trading ghost stories and laughing at Mike's terrible impressions when we heard it. A low, mechanical hum, barely audible over the crackling of the fire. We all jumped as a twig broke somewhere in the darkness beyond our little circle of light. "Probably just a deer," Jake said, but his voice was tense. Curiosity got the better of us. We decided to investigate, armed with flashlights and a healthy dose of liquid courage. As we ventured deeper into the woods, the humming grew louder. Then, through a break in the trees, we saw it. A clearing bathed in harsh floodlights, filled with makeshift structures and what looked like heavy machinery. "Holy shit," Sarah whispered. "Is that a meth lab?" Before we could process what we were seeing, a voice rang out. "Hey, who's there?" Panic set in. We turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, hearts pounding. I could hear shouts behind us, the sound of engines revving to life. We sprinted back to our campsite, grabbed what we could, and made a beeline for our cars. As we peeled out onto the dirt road, headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. They were following us, and they were gaining. The next few minutes were a blur of hairpin turns and terrifying near misses as we raced down the mountain. Just when I thought we'd lost them, a truck came roaring out of a side road, nearly T-boning us. We finally made it to the highway, our pursuers falling behind. We drove for hours, too scared to stop, too wired to speak. When we finally pulled over at a 24-hour diner, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. "We need to call the cops," Liz said, her voice shaky. But as we sat there, debating our next move, I noticed something. A black SUV pulling into the parking lot, moving slowly, deliberately, and another one behind it. "Guys," I said, my mouth dry, "I think we need to go. Now." We slipped out the back, hearts racing once again, and that's when the true horror of our situation hit me. This wasn't just some backwoods operation we'd stumbled upon. This was organized, far-reaching, and they weren't going to let us just walk away. For weeks after, we lived in fear. Strange cars parked outside our homes, mysterious hang-up calls in the middle of the night, the feeling of being watched, always. But the real twist? The moment that made my blood run cold and my skin crawl? It came a month later, when I was grabbing coffee before work. As I waited for my order, I overheard 2 guys in suits talking in low voices. The operation in the mountains was compromised, one said. We had to shut it down and relocate. "What about the witnesses?" the other asked. The first man smiled, a cold, predatory grin that made my heart stop. "Oh, we're taking care of them, slowly, carefully. They'll never see it coming." As I stood there, frozen in terror, the barista called out my name, and the 2 men turned, their eyes locking onto me with chilling recognition. In that moment, I realized the true horror of our situation. We weren't just in the wrong place at the wrong time. We were now pawns in a game much bigger and more dangerous than we could have ever imagined. And the game was just beginning. So remember, next time you're planning a nice, relaxing trip to the great outdoors, be careful what you stumble upon. Because sometimes, the real monsters aren't hiding in the shadows of the trees. They're hiding in plain sight, waiting for their moment to strike. And trust me, you never know who might be listening. I've always been a sucker for antiques, especially those with a bit of mystery to them. That's why when I stumbled upon that ornate mirror at the flea market last weekend, I couldn't resist. Its tarnished silver frame and slightly clouded glass spoke of years gone by, of stories untold. Little did I know, it would soon become the centerpiece of my own terrifying tale. Living alone in my small apartment, I'd grown accustomed to the silence, the solitude, But something about that mirror seemed to fill the void, to breathe life into my quiet existence. I hung it in my bedroom, opposite my bed, and found myself drawn to its reflection more and more each day. At first, the changes were subtle. A flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, a shadow that didn't quite match my own. I dismissed these as tricks of the light, figments of my imagination. But as the days wore on, the mirror's influence grew stronger, more insidious. One night, I awoke with a start, heart pounding. The room was pitch black, save for a faint glow emanating from the mirror. Transfixed, I approached it, my bare feet padding softly on the cold floor. As I drew closer, I could have sworn I saw something. A face, perhaps, but not my own. I jumped, my heart leaping into my throat. It was just a book falling from my nightstand, but it shattered the eerie silence like a gunshot. Shaken, I retreated to my bed, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched. From that night on, things escalated quickly. I'd catch glimpses of a woman in the mirror. A woman who looked like me, but wasn't me. Her eyes were darker, her smile crueler. She'd beckon to me, silent but insistent, and I'd find myself drawn to the mirror against my will. I tried to get rid of it, of course, but every time I resolved to take it down, to smash it, to sell it, anything to be free of its influence, I'd find myself unable to follow through. It was as if the mirror had tapped into some deep, hidden part of me, a part that craved the darkness it offered. My behavior began to change. I found myself doing things I'd never dreamed of, saying cruel things to friends, indulging in reckless behavior, reveling in the pain and fear of others. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop. The woman in the mirror, my darker self, was taking over. One night, as I stood before the mirror, locked in a silent battle of wills with my reflection, I heard a whisper. "Let me out," it said, in a voice that was mine but not mine. "Let me be free." I felt my hand rise almost of its own accord, reaching out to touch the glass. The surface rippled like water, and I felt a chill run down my spine. This was it, the moment of truth. Would I give in to the darkness, or fight to remain myself? With a sudden burst of willpower, I snatched my hand back. "No," I said firmly, meeting the eyes of my reflection. "You're not real. You're not me." The mirror seemed to shudder, and for a moment I thought I'd won. But then my reflection smiled, a wide, unnatural grin that split its face. "Oh, but I am real," it said, its voice now clear as day. "I'm the realest part of you, and I'm not going anywhere." To my horror, a hand, my hand, but not my hand, began to emerge from the mirror's surface. It reached for me, fingers grasping, as my reflection's laughter echoed in my ears. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet in my haste to get away. As I fell, I caught one last glimpse of the mirror. My reflection was gone, replaced by an empty room. My room, but devoid of my presence. And as I hit the floor, a chilling realization washed over me. The woman in the mirror wasn't trying to come out. She was trying to pull me in. You know that feeling when you're walking home late at night and the city seems to transform into something different? That's where I found myself last Tuesday, hurrying down Madison Avenue at 2 a.m. My heels clicked against the pavement, echoing off the buildings like a metronome counting down to... Well, I didn't want to think about what. I'd stayed at the office way too late again. Deadlines, am I right? But as I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The usual bustle of the city had faded to an eerie quiet, broken only by the occasional distant siren or the rustle of trash skittering across the street. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Quick, purposeful steps that seemed to be getting closer. My heart rate spiked, and I picked up my pace, clutching my purse tighter. I nearly jumped out of my skin as a cat knocked over a trash can in a nearby alley. The sudden noise sent my already frayed nerves into overdrive, and I stumbled, twisting my ankle. "Are you all right?" a concerned voice called out. I looked up to see a man approaching, his face a mask of worry. He was well-dressed, probably in his 40s, with kind eyes and a reassuring smile. That looked like a nasty fall. Relief washed over me. Just a good Samaritan, not some creep stalking the night. "I'm fine," I said, trying to stand but wincing as pain shot through my ankle. Or maybe not so fine. "Here, let me help you," he offered, extending his hand. "I'm a doctor. I can take a look at that ankle if you'd like." My office is just around the corner. Now I know what you're thinking. Strange man late at night offering to take me to a second location? Red flags galore, right? But there was something about him, his calm demeanor, his professional appearance that put me at ease. Plus, my ankle was throbbing something fierce. That would be great, thank you, I said, accepting his help. As we walked, or rather, as I limped and he supported me, he chatted amiably about the neighborhood, the weather, normal stuff. It felt safe, like running into a friend of a friend at a party. We turned down a side street, then another. The buildings here were older, more rundown. A flicker of unease passed through me. Is your office much further? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Just here, he said, gesturing to a nondescript door. As he fumbled with his keys, I glanced around, suddenly very aware of how quiet and isolated this area was. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit hallway. After you, he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to run. But before I could act, I felt a sharp prick in my neck. The world began to spin, and as darkness closed in, I heard him whisper, "Don't worry, I'll take good care of you, just like all the others." I woke up, somewhere else, somewhere dark and cold. As my eyes adjusted, I realized with horror that I wasn't alone. Other women were there, some conscious, some not, all trapped. And that's when the true terror set in, not just for myself, but for all the women out there who might find themselves in a similar situation. Because the scariest part wasn't the pain or the fear of what might happen next. It was the realization that this man, this monster, had weaponized kindness. He'd taken one of the few things we could rely on in this often cruel world, the helping hand of a stranger, and turned it into a trap. As I heard his footsteps approaching, a bone-chilling thought struck me. How many other predators were out there, hiding behind masks of concern and helpfulness? How many other women had fallen for the same trick or would fall for it in the future? The door opened, flooding the room with harsh light. He stood there, still wearing that kind, doctorly smile. "Who's next for their checkup?" he asked cheerfully. And in that moment, I realized that the true horror wasn't just what was happening to us. It was the knowledge that somewhere out there, on another dark street, another helpful stranger was approaching another unsuspecting victim. Because in a world where kindness can be a trap, how can we ever truly feel safe again? You know how they say, be careful what you wish for? Well, I should have heeded that advice when I inherited Great Aunt Mildred's farmhouse. I'd never met the woman, barely knew she existed. But there I was, proud owner of a dilapidated Victorian in the middle of nowhere. Perfect for a struggling writer seeking solitude to finish his magnum opus, right? The place was a time capsule, all faded wallpaper and antique furniture. As I explored, the floorboards creaking ominously beneath my feet, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching me. Ridiculous, I know, but there was something in the air, a heaviness that seemed to press in from all sides. I set up my writing nook in the attic, surrounded by dusty boxes and forgotten heirlooms. The isolation was exactly what I needed, the words flowing like never before. But as the days wore on, strange things started happening. I nearly jumped out of my skin as a book fell from the shelf behind me. Heart racing, I picked it up, a leather-bound journal I hadn't noticed before. As I flipped it open, a yellowed photograph fluttered to the floor. It showed a group of people standing in front of the farmhouse, their faces blurred and distorted. Intrigued, I began reading. The journal belonged to my great-grandfather, detailing his life on the farm. At first, it was mundane stuff, crop yields, weather patterns. But as I delved deeper, the entries took a dark turn. He wrote of strange rituals performed in the barn at midnight, of sacrifices made to ensure bountiful harvests, of a pact made with something that demanded payment in blood. I told myself it was nonsense, the ramblings of a superstitious old man. But then I started noticing things, the way shadows seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them, the whispers that echoed through the halls late at night, the locked door in the basement that no key would open. One night, unable to sleep, I decided to investigate that door. Armed with a crowbar and a flashlight, I made my way down the creaking stairs. The basement air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something else. Something metallic and sickly sweet. As I approached the door, my flashlight flickered and died. In the sudden darkness, I heard something, a soft scratching sound coming from behind the door. Then a voice, barely a whisper, "We've been waiting for you." I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. As I scrambled up the stairs, I could have sworn I heard the door creaking open behind me. The next day, I threw myself into my writing, trying to forget what had happened. But the words that flowed from my fingers weren't my own. They spoke of ancient rites, of deals made in blood, of a hunger that could never be satisfied. As I read what I'd written, horror dawning, I realized the truth. The inheritance wasn't just the house. It was a legacy, a duty passed down through generations. The land demanded sacrifice, and it was my turn to pay the price. That night, as I sat in the attic, surrounded by the ghosts of my ancestors, I made a chilling discovery. The blurred faces in the photograph, they weren't distorted. They were changing, shifting into something inhuman. And as I stared at my own reflection in the window, I saw my features begin to ripple and warp. The true horror, I realized, wasn't just the dark secret my family had kept for generations. It was the knowledge that I was now part of it, that the sins of the past were now mine to bear, to continue. Because in that moment, as I felt my humanity slipping away, I understood the terrifying truth. I wasn't just the inheritor of this cursed legacy. I was its next victim, and its next perpetrator. As the change overtook me, a final, bone-chilling thought crossed my mind. Somewhere out there, another unsuspecting relative was about to receive an unexpected inheritance, and the cycle would begin anew. The land must have its due, and now, so must I. You know that feeling when you move to a new place and everything seems just a little too perfect? That's exactly how I felt when I first arrived in Sycamore Grove. Picture perfect houses with manicured lawns, friendly neighbors always ready with a wave and a smile, and a sense of community so strong you could almost taste it in the air. It was like stepping into a Norman Rockwell painting, only with more cul-de-sacs and fewer newsboys. At first, I was thrilled. After years of city living, this suburban paradise seemed like a dream come true. But you know what they say about things that seem too good to be true? It started with little things. The way conversations would abruptly halt when I approached. The furtive glances exchanged between neighbors over their pristine white picket fences. The way Mrs. Johnson, from across the street, would always insist on watering her lawn at precisely 3:17 p.m., rain or shine. Then came the neighborhood watch meetings. Now, I'm all for community safety, but these gatherings had an intensity that bordered on fanatical. Every week, without fail, the residents would gather in the community center, their faces a mask of forced cheerfulness that never quite reached their eyes. One night, unable to quell my curiosity, I decided to eavesdrop. As I crept around the back of the building, a twig snapped under my foot. I froze, heart pounding, certain I'd been discovered. But the voices inside continued, oblivious to my presence. Another one gone missing. A voice that sounded like Mr. Peterson from 2 doors down was saying, "That's the third this month." "We can't let this get out," Mrs. Johnson replied, her usually chirpy voice now cold as ice. "You know what happened in Oakwood Hills when they couldn't keep it contained." I leaned closer, straining to hear more, when suddenly, a raccoon had knocked over a trash can nearby, sending me stumbling backward in surprise. By the time I regained my composure, the meeting had adjourned, and the neighbors were filing out, their faces once again plastered with those eerie smiles. From that night on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong in Sycamore Grove. I started noticing other things too. The way certain houses would go dark for days at a time, their occupants seemingly vanishing into thin air. The strange symbols carved into tree trunks at the edge of the woods. The muffled sounds that sometimes echoed from beneath the streets late at night. I tried to rationalize it all. Maybe I was just paranoid, seeing patterns where none existed. But deep down, I knew. This perfect community was hiding something dark, something terrible. It all came to a head on the night of the annual block party. As I made my way through the crowd, nodding and smiling at my neighbors, I overheard snippets of conversation that chilled me to the bone. Almost time. The offering must be made. Newcomer doesn't suspect a thing. Suddenly the pieces fell into place. The disappearances, the secrecy, the rituals, And now, me, the newcomer, the next offering. I turned to run, but found myself surrounded by smiling faces, their eyes now glowing with an otherworldly light. As they closed in, their perfect veneers cracking to reveal something inhuman beneath, I realized the true horror of Sycamore Grove. This wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a feeding ground. And I, in my naive desire for a perfect suburban life, had walked right into the trap. As hands reached out to grab me, a bone-chilling thought struck me. How many other communities like this were out there? How many other unsuspecting newcomers were being lured in, never to be seen again? The last thing I saw before everything went dark was Mrs. Johnson's face, her kind grandmotherly smile now twisted into something monstrous. "Welcome to the neighborhood, dear," she hissed. "We hope you'll stay forever." And as consciousness slipped away, I realized that the true terror of Sycamore Grove wasn't just what lay beneath its perfect facade. It was the knowledge that somewhere out there, another idyllic community was being built, another trap was being set, and another unsuspecting victim was about to make the same mistake I had. After all, who doesn't want to live in the perfect neighborhood? You know how they say every house has a story? Well, let me tell you, our little fixer-upper had a whole library of tales, each more chilling than the last. My wife Sarah and I thought we'd struck gold when we snagged this Victorian beauty for a steal. Sure, it needed work, but we were ready for the challenge. Or so we thought. It started innocently enough. A bit of peeling wallpaper here, a creaky floorboard there, nothing we couldn't handle with a little elbow grease and a trip to the hardware store. But as we dug deeper, quite literally, into the bones of this old house, things took a turn for the bizarre. First, it was the strange symbols we found carved into the baseboards, hidden beneath layers of paint. Probably just some kid's graffiti. I laughed nervously, trying to ignore the way the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Then came the discovery in the attic. As I pried up the old floorboards, intending to lay down proper insulation, my hand brushed against something soft. Thinking it was just some old fabric, I gave it a tug. What emerged was a doll, its porcelain face cracked and its eyes eerily lifelike. But that wasn't the worst part. Tucked inside the doll's tattered dress was a yellowed piece of paper with a single word scrawled in what looked disturbingly like dried blood. "Hide." I nearly jumped out of my skin as a stack of boxes toppled behind me. Heart racing, I spun around, half expecting to see some ghostly figure. But it was just Sarah, looking as startled as I felt. "Sorry," she said, her voice shaky. "I thought I saw—" "Never mind. What's that you've got?" I quickly hid the doll behind my back, not wanting to freak her out more than she already was. "Nothing, just some old junk," I lied, making a mental note to dispose of the creepy thing later. As the renovation progressed, so did the oddities. The false wall in the study that concealed a collection of Victorian medical instruments, still stained with God knows what. The strange whispers that seemed to emanate from the heating vents whenever we turned on the furnace. The way shadows in the hallway sometimes moved when there was nothing there to cast them. But it was the basement that held the real horror. We'd been avoiding it, focusing on the upper floors first, but eventually we couldn't put it off any longer. As I descended the creaky stairs, flashlight in hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into the maw of some slumbering beast. The beam of light danced across the damp walls, revealing century-old mason work, and— wait, was that a door? Hidden behind an old shelving unit, barely visible, was the outline of a small door. Curiosity overcoming my apprehension, I pushed aside the shelves and turned the rusted handle. The door swung open with a groan that seemed to echo through the entire house. And there, in a space no bigger than a closet, I found them. Dozens of jars, their contents murky and indistinct. But as I lifted one for a closer look, I realized with dawning horror what I was seeing. Human remains. Preserved, catalogued, and hidden away like some macabre collection. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. What kind of monsters had lived here? What dark secrets were we unearthing with every swing of the hammer, every stripped layer of wallpaper? That's when I heard Sarah's scream from upstairs. I raced up the steps, taking them two at a time, my heart pounding in my ears. I found her in the master bedroom, staring at the wall we'd just stripped of its ancient wallpaper. There, revealed by our own hands, was a mural. A massive, intricate painting depicting scenes of unspeakable horror. Rituals, sacrifices, transformations that defied natural law. And in the center of it all, a figure that looked disturbingly familiar. A figure that, as I stared in disbelief, seemed to turn its head and look right at me with eyes that were all too alive. That's when the true terror set in. Because I realized that we hadn't just bought a house with a dark past. We'd awakened something that had been waiting, biding its time behind plaster and paint, beneath floorboards and foundation. As the walls began to pulse with an unholy light, and the air filled with whispers of long-dead voices, a chilling thought struck me. We weren't renovating this house. It was renovating us. And as I felt my very being start to unravel, becoming one with the malevolent force we'd unleashed, I had one final, bone-chilling realization. Somewhere out there, another unsuspecting couple was about to get a great deal on a lovely old fixer-upper, and the cycle would begin anew. Because some stories once started never truly end. They just find new readers to terrify. You know that feeling when you're exhausted after a long day, and all you want is to crawl into bed? That's exactly how I felt last Tuesday night after my late psychology class. The campus was eerily quiet as I waited for my rideshare, the autumn chill seeping through my jacket. When the car pulled up, I was relieved. The driver, a middle-aged man with a neatly trimmed beard, seemed friendly enough. "Long night?" he asked as I slid into the back seat. "You have no idea," I replied, sinking into the leather upholstery. The car's interior was immaculate, almost too perfect. A faint scent of pine air freshener hung in the air. As we pulled away from the curb, I noticed the driver taking an unfamiliar route. I think you missed the turn for the highway," I said, trying to keep the nervousness out of my voice. He chuckled, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. "Just a little shortcut, I know. Don't worry, I'll get you home safe and sound." Something about the way he said it made my skin prickle. I tried to focus on the passing scenery, but the streetlights were becoming fewer and farther between. The buildings gave way to trees, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers in the darkness. I checked my phone, ready to share my location with a friend, when I realized with a jolt of panic that I had no signal. The driver must have noticed my distress because he spoke again, his voice unnervingly calm. "Cell reception's spotty out here, but don't worry, we're almost there." Almost where? This was definitely not the way to my apartment. My heart began to race as I realized how vulnerable I was. Trapped in a moving vehicle with a stranger, heading God knows where. Suddenly, a deer darted across the road. The driver swerved sharply, and I was thrown against the door. The impact sent a shock through my system, momentarily drowning out my fear with adrenaline. "Sorry about that," the driver said, his tone maddeningly casual. "These country roads can be treacherous at night." Country roads? We should have been in the suburbs by now. I tried to keep my voice steady as I asked, "Are you sure this is the right way?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slowed the car, pulling over to the side of the deserted road. My pulse quickened as he turned to face me, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "You know," he said softly, "I've been doing this for a long time, picking up unsuspecting passengers, taking them on detours." I fumbled for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. "Child locks, of course," the driver continued, his voice taking on a chilling edge. "But you're different. You notice the wrong turns. You question the route. That's more than most do." I was trembling now, my mind racing through possible escape scenarios. None of them ended well. Then, without warning, he reached into his jacket pocket. I flinched, expecting the worst. But instead of a weapon, he pulled out a badge. "Detective John Marston," he said, his demeanor shifting completely. "I'm afraid you've just participated in an undercover operation testing the safety protocols of rideshare services." The relief that flooded through me was quickly replaced by indignation. "What? Are you serious?" He nodded, his expression grave. "We've had a string of abductions involving rideshare drivers. This sting operation is part of our investigation." As he spoke, I noticed movement outside the car. Several police vehicles had silently pulled up behind us, their lights off. "I'm sorry for the scare," the detective continued, "but your reactions tonight might help us save lives." I sat there, stunned, as the implications sank in. The fear, the panic, the helplessness I'd felt, it had all been orchestrated. A test. But as Detective Marston opened the door to let me out, a chilling thought struck me. If this had been real, if he had been a genuine predator, would I have survived the night? As I stepped out into the cool night air, surrounded by police officers, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just glimpsed the darkest potential of human nature. And somewhere out there, beyond the reach of this sting operation, real monsters were still prowling the streets, waiting for their next unsuspecting victim. The true horror, I realized, was that next time, it might not be a test, and there might not be a detective waiting to reveal the truth at the end of the ride. You know how they say you can be anyone online? Well, let me tell you, that sword cuts both ways. I learned that lesson the hard way, and trust me, it's a story that'll make you think twice before swiping right ever again. It all started innocently enough. I was just another lonely heart in the digital sea, casting my line into the vast ocean of dating apps and social media. At first, it was the usual fare. A few matches here, some flirty messages there, nothing to write home about. But then I matched with Alex. God, Alex was perfect. Witty, charming, with a profile that checked every box on my wish list. We hit it off immediately, our conversations flowing like we'd known each other for years. It felt like I'd finally found my person, you know? As we chatted more, I noticed how our interests aligned almost eerily well. Favorite books, music, even obscure TV shows, it was like looking in a mirror. I should have been suspicious, but I was too caught up in the euphoria of connection to see the red flags. My phone buzzed with a new message, making me jump. It was Alex, suggesting we move our chat to a more private platform. "I've got something special to show you," the message read. My heart raced with anticipation as I clicked the link. The new chat opened, and suddenly my screen was filled with photos. Photos of me. Not just recent ones, but images spanning years. Some I didn't even remember taking. Selfies, group shots at parties, even pictures through my apartment window. My blood ran cold as I scrolled through this digital shrine to me. How was this possible? Had Alex been stalking me all this time? Then came the kicker. A video started playing, showing me in real time, sitting at my desk, phone in hand. I spun around, heart pounding, but my apartment was empty. The camera angle, it was coming from my laptop. Panic rising, I tried to close the chat to shut down my devices, but nothing responded. My screens filled with message after message. Did you really think it was a coincidence? That someone could be so perfect for you? I've been watching you for months, learning everything about you, becoming your ideal match. And now, you're mine. As the truth sank in, I realized the horrifying extent of my vulnerability. Every post, every like, every innocent share, they'd all been breadcrumbs leading this predator right to me. I'd handed over the keys to my life one click at a time. But the real terror? It wasn't just about me. How many others had fallen into this trap? How many more would? Because in that moment, as my devices betrayed me and my digital life became a prison, I understood the chilling reality of our connected world. We're all exposed, all vulnerable. And somewhere out there, someone is watching, waiting, crafting the perfect persona to lure in their next victim. As my laptop camera light blinked ominously, a final message appeared. "Don't worry, you're not alone. I've got quite the collection now. And you know what they say, sharing is caring." The screen flashed, revealing a mosaic of faces, dozens, maybe hundreds of people, all looking as terrified as I felt, all trapped in this digital nightmare. And that's when the true horror hit me. This wasn't just about one predator, one victim. It was an entire underground network, a dark web of manipulation and control. And I, in my naive search for connection, had just become their newest exhibit. As I sit here, paralyzed with fear, watching my life unravel through the very devices I once trusted, I can't help but wonder, who's watching you right now? And more importantly, who are you really talking to on the other side of that screen? Because in this brave new digital world, the scariest monsters aren't hiding under your bed. They're hiding behind perfectly crafted profiles, waiting for you to let them in. And once they're in, there's no escape. Trust me, I know. You know how they say talking to a therapist is supposed to help you unload your burdens? Well, let me tell you, sometimes those burdens come back to haunt you in ways you never imagined. That's what happened to me, and trust me, it's a story that'll make you think twice before spilling your deepest, darkest secrets to anyone, even a so-called professional. It all started innocently enough. I'd been struggling with anxiety and depression for years, and finally decided to seek help. Dr. Evelyn Clark came highly recommended, warm, empathetic, with a track record of helping people turn their lives around. From the moment I stepped into her plush office, with its soothing earth tones and soft lighting, I felt at ease. Our sessions quickly became the highlight of my week. Dr. Clark had this way of making me feel heard, understood. I found myself opening up about things I'd never told anyone. Childhood traumas, secret fears, the darkest corners of my psyche. It was cathartic, you know? Like finally lancing a festering wound. I nearly jumped out of my skin as a framed certificate fell off the wall behind me. Dr. Clark apologized, quickly writing it, but not before I caught a glimpse of the name on the diploma. It wasn't hers. "Oh, that's my colleague's," she said smoothly. "We share the office space." I brushed it off, too engrossed in our session to dwell on it. But looking back, that should have been my first clue that something was off. As the weeks went by, I started noticing other little inconsistencies. The way Dr. Clark sometimes seemed to forget details I'd shared in previous sessions. The odd questions she'd ask that seemed to veer into territory we'd never discussed. And then there were the times I could have sworn I heard muffled voices coming from behind the heavy oak door of her private office. But it wasn't until that fateful day, 6 months into our sessions, that the true horror of my situation became clear. I arrived early for my appointment, the receptionist waving me through with a distracted smile. As I approached Dr. Clark's office, I heard her voice, animated and excited. And then she told me about the time she found her father's secret family. Can you believe it? This stuff is gold, absolute gold. My blood ran cold. She was talking about me, about the painful confession I'd made just last week. I burst into the room, my heart pounding. Dr. Clark was there, phone to her ear, her face a mask of shock and guilt. I can explain," she stammered. But as I looked around the room, the truth became horrifyingly clear. The walls were lined with bookshelves, filled not with psychology texts but with lurid paperbacks. Titles like Confessions of the Couch and Therapist's Tell-All jumped out at me. And there on her desk was a manuscript. My story, my pain, laid bare for the world to see. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Dr. Clark, if that was even her real name, wasn't a therapist at all. She was a writer, using her patients' deepest secrets as fodder for her trashy novels. But the true horror, the moment that made my skin crawl and my stomach churn, came when I saw the framed photos on her desk. Dozens of faces, all looking vulnerable, trusting, all her victims. And then I saw the notebook, open to a fresh page. At the top, in bold letters, "New patient intake." As our eyes met, I saw not remorse or shame in her gaze, but a cold, calculating interest. To her, I wasn't a person in pain seeking help. I was just another story to be exploited, another chapter in her twisted anthology. In that moment, I understood the true depth of her betrayal. It wasn't just about my secrets being exposed. It was the realization that every moment of vulnerability, every tear shed, every breakthrough I thought I'd made, it was all just material for her next bestseller. As I stood there, frozen in horror, a chilling thought struck me. How many others were out there, pouring their hearts out to fake therapists, their deepest fears and darkest moments being collected and commodified? Because in this world where trust is currency and vulnerability is a commodity, the real monsters aren't hiding under our beds or in our closets. They're sitting across from us in tastefully decorated offices, nodding sympathetically as they mine our souls for profit. So remember, next time you're thinking about opening up to someone, anyone, be careful, because you never know who might be listening, or what they might do with what they hear. And trust me, some stories are better left untold. You know how it is when you're up against a deadline, right? That's where I found myself last Friday night, burning the midnight oil at Apex Industries. The office was a ghost town. Just me and the hum of fluorescent lights keeping each other company. Or so I thought. I'd been pulling late nights all week, determined to nail this project and finally snag that promotion I'd been eyeing. The quiet after hours was perfect for focus. No chattering coworkers, no constant ping of emails. Just me and my spreadsheets, locked in an epic battle of wills. It started with little things. A coffee mug I could have sworn I'd left in the break room somehow appearing on my desk. My chair adjusted slightly higher than I remembered leaving it. Easy enough to dismiss as sleep-deprived forgetfulness, right? But then things got weird. I noticed a sticky note on my monitor with a phone number I didn't recognize. When I called it, all I got was static and what sounded like heavy breathing. I chalked it up to a prank from the IT guys and tried to refocus on my work. I nearly jumped out of my skin as a book fell off the shelf behind me. Heart racing, I spun around, half expecting to see someone there. But the office was empty, shadows stretching long in the dim light. As I bent to pick up the book, something caught my eye. A small black object tucked behind the potted plant on my desk. With trembling fingers, I pulled it out. A camera. Tiny, sophisticated, and definitely not company issued. My blood ran cold as the implications sank in. How long had it been there? Who put it there? And more importantly, what had it seen? I frantically began searching my workspace, finding more cameras hidden in impossible places. Under my keyboard, inside my desk lamp, even one disguised as a button on my coat rack. Whoever had done this had been meticulous, patient, and terrifyingly thorough. As I stood there, surrounded by the evidence of my invaded privacy, a chilling thought struck me. If they'd gone to such lengths to watch me here, what about my home? My car? How deep did this rabbit hole go? Just then, my computer pinged. A new email. Subject line, I see you. With shaking hands, I opened it. Inside was a single image, a photo of me taken moments ago, standing in the middle of my office, surrounded by the cameras I'd just discovered. The timestamp was from 2 minutes in the future. I whirled around, eyes darting to every corner, every shadow, but I was alone. Or at least, I appeared to be. Another ping, another email. You're wondering who I am, why I'm doing this. The truth is, I've always been here, watching, waiting. You just never noticed me. My mind raced through every interaction, every mundane moment of my daily routine. Had I somehow invited this? Given some silent signal that I was a suitable target for this twisted game? A third email arrived. Look in your bottom desk drawer. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I opened the drawer. Inside was a manila folder, stuffed with papers. With growing horror, I flipped through them. Detailed logs of my daily activities. Photographs of me in various locations, at home, shopping, even on dates. And most chillingly, a comprehensive dossier on my family, friends, and coworkers. The final page was a handwritten note. Now you see how easy it is to become invisible. To watch without being seen. To know without being known. Welcome to my world. As the full weight of the situation crashed over me, I realized the true horror wasn't just that I'd been watched. It was that I'd been so oblivious, so caught up in my own little world, that I'd never noticed the predator lurking in plain sight. And the most terrifying thought of all? This person, this shadow who'd made me the unwitting star of their own private show, was probably someone I knew. Someone I saw every day. Someone who smiled and waved and asked about my weekend, all while meticulously documenting my every move. As I sat there, paralyzed by fear and uncertainty, one final email arrived. Don't worry, I'll see you on Monday, same time as always. And just like that, my safe, predictable world shattered. Because now I knew, every casual glance, every friendly interaction, every mundane moment could be part of someone else's sinister design. And I'd never look at my coworkers or myself the same way again.
Thanks for joining us in the shadows tonight. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories every week. Have you got a story of your own? Share it in the comments below. We love hearing from you. And remember, the darkness holds many secrets. Are you brave enough to uncover them? Until next time, keep your lights on and your doors locked. Sweet nightmares.